The early morning sun filtered through a veil of mist, casting long golden beams across the dew-soaked pastures of Elk Ridge Ranch. The land stretched quiet and sleepy, nestled between rolling hills and a distant pine forest. Only the low murmur of wind and the occasional bark from the kennel disturbed the hush of dawn. In the distance, a lean figure hobbled toward the stables, his shadow stretching ahead like a memory he couldn't quite shake. Thomas Redley, 72, and walking with the weight of too many winters, grunted as he unlatched the main barn door. His right knee, once shattered during a bull riding accident in his youth, ached with a morning chill. But that never stopped him. Not today. Not on a day like this. Inside the barn, the hay smelled sweet and earthy, and the silence buzzed with anticipation. He paused at the third stall on the right. "Morning, little one," he said, voice gravelly and tender. Inside, curled up in a bed of straw, was the oddest sight any horseman might ever witness. A tiny chestnut foal, barely a few weeks old, lay fast asleep, surrounded by 3 large, shaggy dogs. Daisy, the old sheepdog with cloudy eyes, Max, a golden retriever with a scarred ear, and Rex, the youngest of the pack, a wiry mutt with endless energy. They encircled the foal like loyal guards, their noses twitching with each shallow breath the baby horse took. The foal stirred, then blinked up at Thomas with deep, brown eyes full of mischief. Then it yawned and barked. It didn't whinny. It barked. A short, awkward yelp that startled even Rex, who tilted his head in confusion. "Lord help me," Thomas muttered, leaning on the stall gate. "You really think you're one of them, don't you?" The foal scrambled to its wobbly legs and pranced in a little circle, tail swishing like a puppy's. Max got up and licked its face. Daisy just gave a sigh and rested her chin back on her paws. To them, it wasn't strange. To Thomas, it was a miracle that kept his heart beating since Ellie passed last winter. 3 weeks ago, in the aftermath of a flash flood that gutted a nearby sanctuary, Thomas found the foal alone on the riverbank, its mother's lifeless body tangled in the reeds. He didn't hesitate. He lifted the soaking, shivering creature into his truck, drove home through thunder and mud, and laid it beside the fire. The dogs, without any instruction, nestled in close that night. They hadn't left the foal's side since. Thomas named him Copper, for the shimmer in his coat that caught the light, just right, like a newly minted penny. But now, Copper had no idea he was a horse. He chased his tail. He tried to dig. He even barked at his own reflection in the water trough. The ranch hands chuckled at first, but now they whispered behind Thomas's back, said he was going soft, losing his grip, talking to a foal like it was a house pet, letting dogs raise a horse. This morning, Thomas knew he had to face the hard truth. Copper needed to be reintroduced to his own kind. A colt pretending to be a dog had no future, and Thomas couldn't stop time, no matter how much he wanted to hold onto these strange, tender mornings forever. He stepped into the stall and clicked his tongue. "Come on, Copper. Time for some real training." Copper bounded toward him, hoofs clattering, tongue lolling as if he'd understood every word. He followed Thomas, not with the graceful gait of a young horse, but with the clumsy, eager bounce of a Labrador. Thomas sighed and shook his head. His hand brushed Copper's forehead, and the foal leaned in, the way Daisy always did when asking for affection. Together, they made their way out into the main paddock. The dogs followed, forming a tight, fuzzy procession. From the upper fence, young Cody Lawson leaned against the post, smirking. "He still thinks he's a dog." Thomas didn't respond. He didn't have to. Cody chuckled and spat into the grass. "You ever think maybe you're not doing him any favors, Tom? What kind of horse doesn't even know how to be won?" Thomas didn't look up. He led Copper into the ring and stood quietly while the foal paced nervously, glancing back at his canine siblings. Rex barked once. Copper whinnied a high, confused sound and pawed at the dirt. Thomas watched, heart heavy. "He'll figure it out." "I wouldn't bet on it," Cody said, hopping off the fence and heading toward the barn. "You better fix that animal before people really start talking." People already were. The neighbors, the vet, even an online article someone had written after seeing a photo Thomas posted of Copper lying between the dogs. "The horse that thinks he's a dog," It read, as if it were all some joke. But to Thomas, there was nothing funny about it. That night, after the chores were done and the sunset lit the hills on fire, Thomas sat on the porch with a chipped mug of coffee in one hand and an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. The dogs lay scattered around his rocking chair. Copper curled against Daisy, his legs tucked under him, twitching in sleep. "You're a horse," Thomas whispered. "You're not supposed to bark or dig holes. You're supposed to run, to thunder across fields, to be wild and proud." But he couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he stared out at the horizon, where the stars were beginning to blink into view. Something deep inside him ached, not just for Copper, but for himself, for all the things time had taken, for the dreams he once chased with Ellie beside him, for the silence that settled in the house when she no longer sang while cooking dinner. He looked down at Copper, nestled between the dogs, utterly content. What if being different wasn't the problem? What if Copper didn't need to become like every other horse? What if he already was exactly who he was meant to be? The thought scared him, because if he was wrong, if Copper never adjusted, he'd be mocked, judged. The foal might end up untrainable, rejected, alone. But if he was right, maybe Copper would prove that sometimes the oddest beginnings led to the most extraordinary outcomes. Just then, Copper stirred and gave a soft, breathy bark in his sleep. Thomas chuckled, despite himself. "Well, boy," he murmured, "guess we'll just have to see where this crazy road takes us." And with that, he leaned back into his rocker, unaware that tomorrow would bring a stranger to the ranch, a woman with eyes like slate and questions he wasn't ready to answer. The truck rolled up the long gravel drive just after sunrise, its tires crunching against the stones like slow thunder. Thomas shielded his eyes with a weathered hand and watched the vehicle approach, the dogs already bounding from the porch, barking but not hostile. Copper lifted his head from the grass near the fence line, ears twitching. The foal took a few uncertain steps forward, his tail swishing once before trotting toward the commotion. Curious, always curious. The door to the truck opened with a creak, and out stepped a woman in her mid-30s, with a dark braid hanging down her back like a line of ink. She wore well-worn jeans, dusty boots, and a faded denim jacket. Her presence was calm, purposeful. As she stepped onto the ranch, her gaze swept over everything like someone assessing a painting for its flaws and its beauty at the same time. "You must be Thomas Redley," she said, her voice level and unhurried. Thomas squinted. "Depends who's skinned." She gave a slight smile. "Name's Mara Winslow. I'm with the County Livestock Board, but I'm also a trainer. Specialize in behavioral rehabilitation." Thomas crossed his arms. "Didn't call for help." "No," she said, nodding. "But someone else did. I read about the foal in that article. Then I got a call from your vet, Dr. Hansen. Said there's a young horse here who thinks he's a dog." "Copper don't think nothing," Thomas replied flatly. "He just is what he is." Mara's eyes flicked toward the paddock, where Copper now stood pressed up against the rails, Rex dancing at his side. The foal barked, or something close to it, and kicked his front hooves in the air like he was inviting play. Mara raised an eyebrow. "He's imprinted on the dogs." Thomas bristled. He was orphaned in a flood, nearly drowned. The dogs took to him. "I didn't force anything." "I'm not accusing you," she said gently. "I'm here to observe. Maybe help. You love him. That's obvious. But this could become dangerous as he grows. A confused horse is unpredictable." Thomas looked away, jaw tightening. "He ain't confused. He's just different." Mara didn't press further. Instead, she walked slowly to the fence and leaned against it. Copper watched her with wide eyes, then pranced closer, his head cocked, his nose twitching. Mara reached into her jacket and pulled out a small treat, apple-flavored pellets, faintly sweet. She held one out on her palm. Copper hesitated. Then, ignoring the dog sniffing at her boots, he stepped forward and gently took the treat. His lips brushed her hand, and for a moment, Mara said nothing. She simply looked at him, not as a curiosity or a case, but as something alive, unique. "He's not scared of people," she said. "No," Thomas replied. "He's not scared of much." "That's a good sign." Thomas stepped forward, his voice low. Look, I know how this looks. And maybe I've let things get too far. But Copper saved me just as much as I saved him. After Ellie died, the house was too quiet. The mornings were longer than they had any right to be. When I found him on that riverbank, I thought maybe I was just giving him a chance. Didn't expect he'd end up giving one to me. Mara turned back to him, eyes softening. I've seen stranger bonds. What matters now is what kind of future you want for him. He'll get bigger, stronger. If he doesn't learn how to behave like a horse, he could hurt someone, or himself. Thomas sighed and ran a hand down his face. What do you suggest? Let me work with him. Just a few days. No force, no harsh training. Just enough to start setting the lines between instinct and habit. And if it don't work? Mara shrugged. Then maybe we accept that he's not like other horses. But at least we'll know we tried. Thomas looked out at Copper, who had now turned in circles and flopped down in the grass beside Rex, panting. The foal rolled onto his back, hooves in the air, completely at ease. Fine, Thomas muttered. But don't treat him like a problem. He's not broken. I never said he was. The next morning, the training began. Mara arrived at dawn and spent her time simply being near Copper without the dogs, letting him grow used to her presence without their interference. It was harder than it sounded. The dogs were protective, Rex especially. When Mara first stepped into the paddock alone, Rex barked and nudged Copper behind him. Thomas, leaning against the post with coffee in hand, raised an eyebrow. Told you. He's got a security detail. I see that, Mara said, carefully squatting down, showing no fear. We'll work on that too. She didn't touch Copper at first. Instead, she mimicked the behavior of a mare, standing at a respectful distance, facing sideways, avoiding direct eye contact. The foal watched her with fascination. Each day, she moved a little closer, until Copper let her brush his shoulder. She began introducing basic horse behaviors, nuzzling, backing away, circling. But Copper often responded with tail wags and enthusiastic little hops. He doesn't understand horse language, Mara said quietly on the third day. Nope, Thomas agreed. He speaks fluent mutt. That evening, after another long session, Copper managed something new. He whinnied. Not a bark, not a yelp, but a clear, high whinny. Awkward, unpolished, but real. It stopped Mara in her tracks. Thomas froze, mug halfway to his lips. Did he just? Mara asked. Thomas nodded slowly. Sounded like a horse to me. Copper seemed startled by the sound himself. He looked around as if wondering who had made it. Then he trotted toward Mara and nudged her arm, uncertain but proud. That's something, she whispered. That's the start. Later that night, as the stars blinked open above the ranch again, Thomas watched the foal sleep between the dogs like always. But something had shifted. He wasn't just mimicking them anymore. There was a seed of something new inside him now. An awareness. A choice. Thomas sat on the porch in silence, Mara beside him, neither of them needing to fill the air with words. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and soil. In the paddock, Copper stirred, stretched, and let out a soft, almost musical whinny. Mara smiled without turning her head. He's remembering who he is. Thomas looked at her, then at the foal, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed hope to settle in beside the grief. He didn't know where this path would end, but tonight, for the first time, he believed it might actually lead somewhere worth going. On the morning of the 6th day, the paddock was unusually still. The dogs lay quietly outside the gate, watching with tired eyes as Mara led Copper in small circles, a lead rope draped gently across his neck rather than fastened. He followed her not because of pressure, but by choice. His movements were no longer clumsy imitations of play, but deliberate, curious, even graceful. Thomas leaned on the fence rail, coffee growing cold in his hands, his expression unreadable. You see it, don't you? Mara asked without turning. The change. He nodded once. It's subtle. But yeah, he ain't barked in over a day. Stopped chasing the birds like he used to. Mara gave a small smile. He's listening more. Learning. Trusting. Copper stopped walking and lowered his head beside her, nuzzling the space just beneath her elbow. Mara stroked his neck gently. He closed his eyes. But progress had its shadows. That evening, as Mara prepared to leave, Copper whinnied loudly and trotted along the fence line, pacing. Rex rose to follow, clearly agitated, and the younger dog barked until Thomas gave a sharp command to quiet down. "He's afraid I won't come back," Mara murmured. Thomas sighed. "You're part of his world now, just like they are." "Attachment is good," she said, "but if he's ever going to be adopted, or even just function among other horses, he has to learn how to cope with separation." Thomas didn't respond. Instead, he walked over and laid a hand on Copper's mane, his thumb brushing the foal's ear the way Ellie used to rub the velvet tips of their horses. Copper calmed under the touch, but his eyes kept darting between Mara and the driveway, worried. The next morning, Mara didn't arrive at dawn. By design, Thomas sat with the dogs on the porch, watching Copper from a distance. At first, the foal stood at the gate, waiting. Then he pawed the ground, snorted, and called out once. Rex barked back in sympathy, but didn't move. Copper circled the paddock 3 times. Then, when no one came, he retreated to the shade near the hay trough and stood still for a long while. Thomas watched him wrestle with something silent and invisible. Hours passed. When Mara finally arrived mid-afternoon, dusty from a detour to another farm, Copper didn't run to the gate. He looked, lifted his ears, but stayed still. When she entered the paddock, he approached her slowly, not frantically. When she reached for his halter, he didn't shove his head under her hand. He simply waited. "You see that?" she whispered. Thomas, who had crept closer without realizing it, nodded. He made a choice. Didn't panic. Just waited. They didn't speak for a while. The wind had picked up, dry and brisk, bringing with it the scent of distant rain. The foal remained calm through it all. By the 10th day, Mara had started introducing Copper to other horses in slow, controlled settings. There was an older mare named Junebug at the nearby rescue center, a patient soul with a calming presence. Mara brought her to Thomas's property in a small trailer, and for a while, she let the two stand on opposite sides of a double-fenced enclosure. Copper didn't know what to make of her. He sniffed the air and pawed the dirt. Junebug ignored him entirely, grazing with her usual grace. When she finally turned to look at him, Copper froze, ears forward, head raised, and let out a low, uncertain whicker. "He's not sure what to do," Mara said. "He's not sure what he is," Thomas replied. Over the next 2 days, the fence was removed, and Copper was allowed to share space with Junebug. At first, he stuck to the edges, mirroring dog behavior, crouching low, wagging his tail, even bowing as if inviting a game. Junebug ignored him at first. Then, when he got too close, she swatted him with her tail and moved away. Copper looked hurt, confused. "Let her set boundaries," Mara said. "He needs that." Slowly, Junebug's firm indifference taught him what the dogs couldn't. He began to mimic her, following her to water, nudging the ground near where she grazed, even laying down nearby instead of beside the dogs. It wasn't rejection. It was redirection. By the 12th day, Thomas noticed a change not just in Copper, but in himself. He had begun rising earlier, moving with a steadiness he thought he'd lost after Ellie's death. He cleaned the paddock without muttering to himself. He hummed again. "You've been smiling more," Mara said one evening as they watched Copper and Junebug share a pile of hay. "I hadn't noticed." "I have." He looked over at her, the lines in his face softened by the golden light. "I was afraid to let him grow. Thought if he stayed small and strange in mine, I wouldn't lose him like I lost everything else." "You haven't lost him," Mara said. "You just gave him the room to become more." Silence settled between them again, gentle this time. Then, just before dusk, something remarkable happened. Junebug walked away from the hay, and Copper didn't follow. Instead, he turned toward the far side of the paddock, where the dogs lay watching. He trotted over, but he didn't bark or roll or pounce. He lowered his head and touched noses with Rex, then backed away slowly, like a goodbye that wasn't sad, just necessary. Thomas's throat tightened. "He chose," Mara said quietly. "He's choosing balance." That night, Mara sat on the porch with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Thomas joined her, both watching the paddock as the stars emerged. "I think he's ready," Mara said. "He'll always be a little different, but he's learned how to be a horse. Enough to live among them, at least." Thomas looked out at the foal, asleep now beside Junebug instead of Rex. "I don't think I'm ready." She smiled. "Then keep him. He doesn't have to leave. You've built him a world that made space for his strangeness, and helped him find himself within it. Not many would have done that." Thomas was quiet. Then, after a long moment, he spoke softly. "I reckon I'll keep him then." They watched in silence as a light breeze swept across the field, ruffling Kappa's mane. And somewhere in the dark, a new whinny rose, confident, clear, and entirely his own. The first thunderstorm of the season came in heavy, without warning. The clouds rolled in fast, dark and swollen, stretching over the valley like an angry quilt. Lightning cracked across the horizon, splitting the sky with white veins. The wind arrived next, fierce and wild, pushing against the old barn doors and rattling the windows of the house. Thomas stood in the paddock, soaked to the bone, calling Kappa's name. He hadn't meant to let them out so late. The morning had been quiet, deceptively mild. The horses had seemed eager to stretch their legs. Even Junebug had galloped once, and Kappa, now more horse than dog, had stayed near her the entire time. But then the storm rolled in before Thomas could bring them back. Now Junebug was in the barn, safely settled in her stall. But Kappa was gone. He had broken the new gate latch, nosed it open like a curious dog, and disappeared just as the wind picked up. Thomas trudged through the wet field, flashlight bouncing, breath sharp in his lungs. "Copper," he called again louder. "Come on, boy. Where are you?" No reply. No whinny. Only the sound of branches groaning and the occasional clap of thunder. Back at the house, Mara had arrived minutes before the rain began. She had rushed in through the back door, dripping and breathless. Now she stood just inside the barn, clutching the lead rope with white-knuckled fingers. "He's never gone off like that," she said. Thomas passed her without slowing. "He's out there. I know it." "Thomas, wait." "I know it." She grabbed a flashlight and followed. The two of them moved in opposite directions across the pasture, calling, pausing, listening. Time blurred in the storm, minutes stretching like wire. Finally, Mara saw movement beyond the orchard, near the old split-rail fence. Something low to the ground, flickering in the shadows. She ran. When she reached the fence, she found Copper standing still, soaked through, mud clinging to his legs. But he wasn't alone. A foal. A smaller one. Shivering, eyes wide with fear. Copper stood protectively in front of it, head lowered, body rigid but calm. Mara gasped, dropping to her knees in the mud. "Thomas," she shouted. "Over here." The older man appeared moments later, wheezing from the run. His flashlight swept over the scene, then locked onto the two horses. "What in God's name?" "He found it," Mara said. "He found her." The foal, spindly, ribs showing, barely standing, staggered forward slightly. Copper moved with her, shielding gentle. Thomas crouched beside them. "She's wild," he said. "Must have gotten separated from her herd in the storm. That explains the broken brush back there." Copper touched noses with the smaller foal and looked back at Thomas. A single look, then a soft nicker. Not panic, not confusion. Intention. "He led her here," Mara whispered. "He knew where she'd be safe." Thomas didn't move for a long moment. Then he slowly extended his hand toward the new foal. She flinched, but Copper nudged her gently forward. Eventually, she allowed Thomas to touch her cheek. "I'll be damned," he murmured. "He's not just learning. He's teaching." They led both foals back through the rain. It wasn't easy. The new one kept stopping, her legs trembling, but Copper never left her side. Not once. He coaxed her gently, with nuzzles and little sounds. When she faltered, he waited. When she stumbled, he stood between her and the wind. Inside the barn, Thomas had already prepared a corner stall with soft straw and blankets. They guided the two foals in together. Mara knelt beside them, toweling Copper off gently. "He didn't just remember what it felt like to be lost," she said. "He acted on it. That's something deeper than instinct." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's empathy." They stayed in the barn well past midnight. The storm rolled away, leaving behind the hush of dripping eaves and a strange, gentle peace. The new foal, whom Mara later named Whisper, slept curled beside Copper. He kept one eye open, a quiet sentinel. In the days that followed, something changed in the way the farm moved. Copper became more than a resident, he became a bridge. Whisper, terrified of everything, found comfort only in him. When Thomas tried to approach, she fled. But if Copper was nearby, she allowed it. She followed his cues, learned his rhythms, and Mara watched in awe as the once confused foal she'd rescued began offering the same safety that had been given to him. Thomas, who once feared becoming attached, began rising earlier, preparing warm mash, humming old songs again without realizing it. He even fixed the barn roof on his own, grumbling about the leaks but smiling the whole time. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he told Mara one morning, watching the two foals grazing side by side. "What wasn't?" she asked. "I wasn't supposed to start over." Mara smiled softly. "But you didn't. You just kept going." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Thomas turned to her. "You think she'll make it?" Mara glanced toward Whisper. "She's got the same odds he had. And he's more than just surviving now." Thomas grunted. "Yeah, he's leading." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Copper stood at the fence line, watching the horizon. Whisper was beside him, smaller but mimicking his stance. Thomas stepped onto the porch, a mug in one hand, and watched them both for a long time. "You ever think about keeping her too?" Mara asked, appearing beside him. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "One more won't break me, and I think Copper would miss her if she left." "She needs him," Mara said. "And maybe," he added, "he needs someone to protect." The last light slipped beneath the trees, casting long shadows across the field. Copper turned from the fence and led Whisper back toward the barn. Their steps synchronized. Thomas sipped his coffee and let out a long breath. Not everything broken stays broken, and sometimes the ones who were lost the hardest become the ones who lead others home.